everyone, and welcome to Creators and Coffee. I'm Erica Sietsma, the CEO and co-founder of Autofluencer, and today I am super excited. We have Alex Taylor of Alex Taylor Racing and so many other things joining us. Hi, Alex.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Pumped to
Good.
have you on Creators and Coffee. We've had a few conversations, and I think a lot of people in the industry know you. If you were at SEMA and you went to the awards banquet, you saw Alex is one of the MCs of that show, along with Jared Deanda. But maybe not everybody knows the Alex Taylor backstory. So would love to share that on this deep dive episode of Creators and Coffee, and have you tell our listeners, how did you get started in the industry? Were you born into it? Did you fall into it?
So I actually did grow up in it. My dad is a builder. He came from Southern California, lived there, right place, right time, kind of born into it, but I took my own path in it. So my dad moved to Arkansas, started his own shop, and mainly did street rods. So him and my mom worked together. They did a production fiberglass building. So they built a business. So they built 33 Willys bodies, 30, Fords. They did all these different things, 41 Willys, and they did over 1,000 production cars. And so my mom ran the office side. My dad ran the shop side. They had employees, whatever. And so my sister and I grew up in the shop. I never knew a life. I tell people this all the time. I didn't know a life that didn't have cars in it. Our vacations were cars. Our friends were car people. I grew up with older people because I was around my mom's and dad's friends. And so that was a lot of show car stuff. But I still, I grew up watching my dad build. I was as hands-on as I could be. Like I spent, probably 12, 13, 14 hours. Like we would take our naps here. I was there from a couple weeks old. So following along and just learning and stuff. My dad's a great teacher. And so I would constantly well, how do you do this? Why do you do it like that? What is this? And he would always stop and teach us. I remember laying up fiberglass bodies with my mom and my cousin when I was 6. I'm sitting there with a roller, with a flashlight. And I'm like, there's air right there. So anyways, that's where early started. And then when I was probably 8, my dad started getting back into drag racing. And he was doing nostalgia racing and gassers and stuff. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the track. But what really made me love drag racing was he got the 2007 Drag Week winning car. And we won't get too deep into that. But I do drag and drive events now. There used to only be one drag and drive event. It's put on by Hot Rod Magazine. And anyways, he traded a car that he built, Street Rod, for the car that won. I absolutely fell in love with that car. I fell in love with drag racing, and I fell in love with drag week at the time.
Yeah.
And they ended up selling that car. It broke my heart, and it was a goal from then that I was going to have a car that was my version of that. And that's what made me want to do drag racing. And they sold it when I was probably 13. And then when I was 15, we built my very first car. I drove to high school. My mom, dad, and I built a 68 Camaro that my mom was nice enough to gift me. We built it, and I just figured out from then on, I love what I'm doing, and I found a way to make that my life.
And so, you go from this passion for it at a very young age, which, I hear a lot. And it's what I love about this industry. And that's why, as we're starting this business, this is the industry we wanted to focus on. And, that it is, in a lot of cases, an entire family business, right? The whole family's in it. But you kind of go from that in your teen years, you're in high school as a passion. How did you then turn it into a career? What happened after high school? What was that next step for you? Did you have a vision then of what you wanted to do, or you're still figuring it out?
So it's interesting. It's one of those things that a lot of people do. You could say that they're born into it or they come from the business, but I actually meet a ton of people that have very, very, very successful, say chassis shops or parts businesses or thing like that. And their kids have no desire to be involved in it, And so it was definitely an active choice. I was lucky enough to have those influences, but I loved it enough that I wanted to pursue it. I was very book smart. I was valedictorian of my graduating class in high school. I was also valedictorian of my college class. Thank you. But book smarts were one of my things. And so I actually went back and forth with what I wanted to do. And I always wanted to do something that was big, but I was like, maybe I'll be an anesthesiologist. And then when I was in college, I was going to school for marketing. I thought, well, maybe I'll do law school. after this. And I actually went and took my LSAT. Like I went through the whole process and did all that. As I was going to school that I wanted to, like I went for marketing, because when I was in my last year of high school and my first year of college, I worked for a company called Crower Cams in San Diego and California. And I traveled with them and I got to see the marketing side of their business. And I always thought, like, my whole thing from when I was, I guess I realized in high school was like, if you have a brand, you can do anything. And I remember thinking like, oh, if I build Alex Taylor, if Alex Taylor becomes a brand, then Alex Taylor, you can't, if your brand is your name, you can't replace the person that created that. That was always the thing that I wanted to do. My mom and dad were self-employed and I wanted to do the same thing. And so I started Alex Taylor Racing when I was a freshman in college. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I was starting my brand kind of thing. This is my second LLC. I had a Too Bad Performance prior to that, named after my Camaro. But anyways, so long story short, I knew I wanted to work on a brand and I knew I wanted to go into marketing because I got to work with Crower and I got to see like the business side of it and things like that. And I went to school for marketing and told myself when I graduated that I was going to give myself a year after graduation to see if I could make car stuff, racing and things like that work full time. And if not, I was going to go to law school. I just so happened to graduate in May of 2020 when the world was collapsing.
Right.
Which actually worked out to my benefit because I ended up giving myself a little bit more time. But it's like all these plans that I had lined up started to crumble. And I was like, this isn't going to work. But I gave myself a little bit more time and started working with companies. My dad and I ended up building a new car, like all these pieces lined up. And I'm sorry to ramble, but real quick, what really made it take off was my dad and I decided to build a new car. And I already had a full season lined up. Like I was trying to do it as much of a business in a business way as I could, my race program, like working with sponsors and stuff. And it was very small. But Dad and I decided to build a brand new car in January of 2021. And it was a huge feat, budget wise and time wise. And long story short, I ended up having to really push myself outside my comfort zone working with partners. And that car pretty much changed my life as far as like approaching sponsors and partners. It's a 55 Chevy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
55 Chevy that I drag race now currently. It was the fastest car I'd driven. It's a 200 mile an hour, quarter mile car. Like pushed me out of my comfort zone as far as driving skill, as far as partners. Like it's just that car was the pivotal moment.
Right. And did you know at that point where you're pushing yourself out of these boundaries, did you know how to approach sponsors? Did you have a guess around that? Or did you just kind of go with your gut of what felt right at the time?
I had worked with partners since I was 16. I went to my very first PRI show when I was 16 years old. And I'm really lucky to have like my mom and dad had never worked with sponsors and partners and stuff like that.
They had a business,
and they were always like, well, they just support me with what I do, and try to help me in any way I can. And we went to the first show and just talked to companies. I wasn't there looking for anything. That wasn't the time of like social influence. That wasn't a thing,
Right.
And we ended up talking to a couple companies and they actually were interested in doing stuff. And so they're like, well, write us a proposal. I'm like, I don't know what a proposal is. I'm 16. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So my mom helped me write a bunch of them when I was like going through my teen years. And I got my very first monetary partnership as $1,000 when I was 18. And I remember, because prior to that, I'd only done one race per year. And I had all these races I wanted to do. And my mom and dad were like, well, you're going to have to find a way to pay for part of that, which is very fair. And I was like, all right. And so I had a 68 Camaro and I wrote a proposal to Flowmaster. We had a friend there, was prior to Holly owning them. And I was like, I will give you 700 things, it felt like, if you guys will give me $1,000. And I made it from Arkansas to Michigan and raced for a weekend on $1,000.
That's amazing.
That was my first sponsorship. And that's when I was like, I can make this a business. But that was still before that was.
And were you doing at that point, social as part of it? I mean, 2017 was, or what
18,
year was it?
Yes. Yeah, it was 18.
Yeah, I mean, that 18, was, social is pretty, established, but maybe not as much in that side of things, especially in drag racing.
It was, but it wasn't. It's one of those things like when I was 16 and starting my Camaro, like influencer wasn't a thing. Like I never started what I'm doing to be an influencer.
Right.
I just did what I loved and then ended up
Right.
sharing stuff. In 2018, I offered YouTube videos. That's what I did. I was like, you can be the sponsor of these. But I mean, my channel was very small. And while there were some big channels out there, it's not like everybody had a YouTube channel. Like now, pretty much everybody does.
Everybody's got one. Yeah.
It was definitely a different landscape then. And companies didn't know how to work with that. But thankfully, I had a couple people that were like willing to work with it.
Yeah. So that was great. So, you have the car, then, you're coming out of what you said, 2021, that's now pushing you into this new world, right? And then what happens from there, right? Is it just, does the social take off? Like, what kind of was that next big kicker?
Right. So I guess I'm kind of jumping back and forth a little bit, but going back to 2021. So like to answer the question previously, yes, I had worked with sponsors, but I hadn't worked with them in the capacity that I was needing to for the 55. And then starting on the 55, the reason I say that changed a lot of stuff is I had raced after graduating, but like, again, pretty much the full year after graduating when I planned on taking on Alex Taylor Racing as full-time, the world was shut down. So it didn't really count. So January 2021 is when stuff started like really kind of picking back up and race schedules were actually out there. And Dad and I decided to do a 6-second car that we built from scratch, me and him, in our shop in 4 months. One, that timeline is absolutely insane. And two, the budget that comes with that is we pulled motor and transmission from his car, but there's still a lot of stuff. And I emailed all these companies that I'd already set my race schedule with. And I had told them, I was like, here's my race schedule. And I emailed them in like January. And I was like, hey, plans changed. This is what we're doing. Would you guys be interested in working on this project? And like, I know it sounds crazy, but just trust me. And I realized then what good people I worked with. I wasn't going to them like, give me. That was never my thing. I was like, hey, we're building this car. This is the content that's coming out with it. This is my plan. And I can get you X, Y, and Z if we can do this in exchange. And at the time, I was just looking for parts because at the time, like, that's what I needed. But then I went to a couple companies for monetary partnership as well. Nothing crazy. Like, it was very minor. I managed probably by myself, 15 different companies over a 4-month period. Whether it be just like a social post here or there, but like I was having to keep track of these parts that were coming in for the car and my obligations to them. And I was editing YouTube videos. I put out like 21 1-hour episode videos. So like building the car, filming, editing, managing all the social stuff. And that's like what really kickstarted it. Like, I was like, this has to be a business. Like, it has to be treated like a business. It was chaos. I didn't know what I was doing for 4 months.
Yeah. And then you pulled it off. And would you say that's really when it started to rise, like from a kind of a following? Where would you say you were at from a follower count? Like, which was your biggest platform at that time? Was it YouTube?
No, Instagram was the biggest. And then YouTube more than doubled. I think I had probably 30,000 when I started it. And then it more than doubled over the course of those 4 months because like we were putting out, like I was trying to put out so quality content. Yeah. And it did really good. And it was a really good series. It was for being like 30,000 followers, almost all the videos got over 100,000 views. So like that was amazing. It was really good ratio, small follower count, but good views. And not only did that teach me a lot about business by just diving in head first, it also, the car itself opened up a lot of opportunities because it's like, I knew that I wanted to be known as like somebody that was respected as a driver. And that's the whole thing with all of this. It's like, I knew what my passion was and I knew what my goals were and I knew what I wanted to be known as. I actually had somebody tell me one time, he was like, I want to be respected. I'm like, what do you want to be respected for? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, what do you want somebody to respect you for? When they think of your name, what is that? And he's like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, then how can they respect you for that if you don't even know? So that's the one thing. Exactly. And so that's the one thing that like I did know I wanted. And that car allowed me to drive at the level that I wanted to start moving into. So yeah. So it's one of those things, like it sounds like, how could I ever do that? But I didn't know how to do it. I just knew what I wanted to do. And it's all about planning and diving in head first.
Such a great lesson though, too, right? I think a lot of people kind of go sometimes into this world of not just being in the, working on the cars or wanting to race,
Mhm.
but maybe they do. Maybe it's just, I just want to race, but they don't have any end game in sight. It's not terrible, but to your point, if you really want to reach success, sit down, be thoughtful, have a plan, think about it, right?
Yeah.
And then,
Mhm.
think about that end goal and then how are you going to get there? And it may not work out exactly to plan, right? A global pandemic
Mm-mm.
may hit, but you pivoted really great and you came up with some, kind of new ways to get there and really nailed it. And so from
Well,
there, yeah, you go.
Well, I was just gonna say that one thing to your point there is like I never wanted to like everybody to ask me what's your 5-year plan. I'm like I don't have a 5-year plan. I don't, and I'm
Right.
not saying that that's the right thing, but like I tell people all the time, you got to find what you really love, like what you. And that sounds
Hmm.
so cliche,
Yeah.
but people don't do that, and you have to find what you really love. There's a lot of things, opportunities that I've been
Yeah.
granted that have come from me doing something that's adjacent to that goal. So
Right.
like if you just like have this like dead set 5-year plan, you might not get there as quick as if you took these opportunities that lead you
Right.
like this. You end up meeting people and doing things and gaining skills that allow you
Yep.
to get to that goal quicker than had you just walked the straight line. So
Absolutely. And I think you said it too, just in a different way of, I was actually just listening to a podcast about like why people don't keep up their New Year's resolutions, right? So we're recording this at the start of
mhm.
the year, everybody's talking about it, but it's sometimes because people aren't connected with their why. They set a
Mhm.
goal, but they don't understand the why. And when it's your passion and when it's your love and when it's a value, a core value, it's much easier to do the editing and do all the emails and manage all those things when you're so centered in that why. It's not just treating it as a business, but your why and you're really attached to it. So to your point, it's kind of hard for your why to truly be a 5-year plan. Maybe that end
It
goal is
is.
your why, but all the steps in there aren't usually always the same. It's part of the plan. So I love that so much. I think that's such great advice to people really anywhere, whether you're starting, a new product in the industry, a new brand, or you are, wanting to be a driver or you're wanting to be, a content creator in this space is really following what you love. We had Solomon Lunger on from the Ford era, and it was a little thing we posted on New Year's, a little snippet. And he was saying that he just decided, when he kind of left his day job, that he was just going to chase happiness. And
Mhm.
that he has found when he goes after things that make him happy, the things that he loves doing, he tends to make money doing that. And every time he
Mhm.
chases money, he ends up usually not getting the money he wanted and unhappy. And he was like, so why would I
Yep.
do that? And I thought that was so great. I mean, it aligns with what you're saying so well.
Mhm.
And
That's
so
very true.
moving after your big banner year of 2021, then talk about a little bit how, things like the hot rod garage and some of those things came about.
After that year, I really decided to approach everything in a much more business mindset.
Yeah.
And I took Alex Taylor Racing, like, and I'm now an S Corp. Like I've gone through stuff like that. I bought a
Yeah.
shop because like it's constant evolution of stuff. And so
Yeah.
I'm constantly looking for what's next. So over the course of the next couple years, let's see, when did I start Hot Rod Garage? That was 2022. So I was racing for full schedule.
Yeah.
I was kind of coming off of the high of building the 55 and,
Yeah.
hitting some goals with it. And it's like, what do I do next? What do I do next? What do I do next? You can really get in your own head. And we started the season off very early in February. And I did another race. It was a shootout race and it was just for fun. But we ended up meeting somebody who had a pro mod and I was racing their pro mod, which is a huge accomplishment. And
Yeah.
I was driving their car for a little bit and I'm like, what do I do next? What do we do next? Like, this is my constant thought. It's eating me up. What do I do
Right.
next? And I got a call. And I'd had plenty of calls with TV producers and different networks and stuff like that and stuff you don't believe it until it happens kind of thing.
Right.
And I had a call one weekend when I was getting ready for a race and they called me and they're like, hey, we want to have a chat. I'm like, here we go. And I sat down and did the whole thing and like we chatted. And he's like, all right, I just wanted to get to know you. I'll keep you in mind. And I'm like, I remember hanging up and I walked up and I talked to my dad and I was like, he's like, how was that? And I was like, it was just another producer. Well,
Right.
that producer happens to be the producer for my show that I currently co-host, which is Hot Rod Garage. And he ended up calling me back a week later, and he was like, hey, actually, there was a lot more to that call than I could tell you, but Tony Angelo, who was the previous co-host for the show for 7 or 8 seasons, he's leaving, and we want you to come do a screen test and fill in his spot. There's going to be a bunch of other people. So they're like, when can you come to LA? So I flew to California the next week, I think it was, and I did my screen test. I had no idea what I was doing. Like, they're just like, there's 10 people watching me from a stage. And I'm sitting there, and I have an LS motor in front of me, and they're like, take the heads off. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, talk while you're doing it. I'm like, what do you want me to talk about? They're like, what would you normally say? I'm like, all right. And so I'm just like taking this thing apart, like with people watching me in a shop that I'm totally unfamiliar with. It's the funniest thing ever. So anyways, I left, and I was like, I like these people. I like this concept. I like this shop. I like this place. I called my dad, and I was like, Dad, I really like this. I hope it works out. He's like, don't get your hopes up. Like, it's not, I don't think it's there yet. Like, I don't think it's the time. Wow. Yeah. I'm like, all right, yeah, that's fine. They ended up calling me back one weekend that I'm racing, like the weekend that you almost can't top. I'm racing a pro mod. I just went 218 in the 8th mile or something like that, 211, and like big things. And then they call me back, and they're like, hey, we want you. Do you want us? And I'm like, is that a question? Wow. So it's like all these cool things happen one weekend, and it's all totally unexpected stuff that was happening. Yeah. And anyways, so like I'm co-host for Hot Rod Garage, and I asked him later, I was like, how did you guys find me? How did that even happen? Because I thought, and I still think it does have partly to do with it, I'd raced Hot Rod Magazine's events. This is Hot Rod Garage. Hot Rod Magazine's owned by Motor Trend. Motor Trend's who owns our show. And so I was like, it's got to be because I've been so involved with Hot Rod. And it was a full circle moment for me. Right. And they're like, well, it's actually one of our girls that works, she keeps our whole show going. She Googled people, like, I don't remember what she Googled, but she Googled some search term that was related to automotive industry. And my name popped up, like racer or something. And she put me on the list because she Googled, and some of my content had popped up from, like, maybe it was Drag Week or something like that. And she put me on the list, and that's how it happened. Wow. And I thought that I actually had got a referral from somebody at Hot Rod, somebody that I actually know that works there. And it turns out that's not actually allegedly how that happened. So I don't know. I probably won't ever know the real story, but that's the story that I know. So
that's
put your
great
content out.
Yeah, well, and I will say that's a big reason why to do YouTube, because, YouTube is the second largest search engine. They're owned by Google. And YouTube content is going to come up Instagram and Facebook are not searchable from outside those platforms. So a person's profile might show up, but their actual, the details in their content won't, but YouTube will. So I think that is a big reason to have a presence on YouTube, and to be smart too about how you write your description, because those are all, at the end of the day, you studied marketing, this, it's all keywords, right? And they're all things that can get searched. And that's why sometimes people are like, oh, these descriptions are so repetitive, but it's because, people might be searching female, race car driver, drag racer, these things, and using that. So that's a great story. I like the Google one. That it was, because of all that effort you put in. And I think sometimes people look at personalities now, right, that are on, the social media, right? Like on your Instagram, I think you have over 275,000 followers now. And I think a lot of people make the false assumption that this happens overnight, right? Like you had one thing go viral, and overnight you become this personality, right? And that's why I like these deep dives, because people can see, no. There was a lot of effort. There was a lot of thought. There was a lot of intention. If you go into it without an intention or a plan or a why, it will fall apart. And I think the concept that you got this awesome opportunity because of a Google search, and then you had to go in and prove yourself, right? You had to pass the test. You had to, know what you were talking about. If you got in there and like I would have, I'm like, I don't know what to do. It wouldn't have worked out.
To your point, I don't mean to interrupt, but with that said, like you're saying, like you had to prove yourself. That's the things where sometimes the opportunities present themselves, but the work that happened prior is what allows that to happen. There were 20 other people that screen tested. Either they didn't have the skills that they presented that they had online, or they didn't have the personality that they presented in a short clip and stuff. And so that's where like social gets tricky, and you have to be in my opinion, you have to be very conscientious as you're doing this, being aligned with what you want to be. I always said, like, I want to be hands-on, I want to be knowledgeable, I want to know stuff. Like, that was always my goal. And so people do things sometimes, like stuff happened overnight, but I say I had a 26-year apprenticeship in my dad's shop, learning hands-on. I had 10 years of drag racing under my belt now. And, you know, I've got all these different things, and there's been so much work and so much dedication and sacrifice put into that. Sometimes people come into social now and they want to go viral. You have to sustain that, and you have to have the meat to back that up, or else it doesn't carry on. And I think that's something, like, I understand sometimes you see numbers and it becomes very intimidating, and you're like tempted to do what gets you there the fastest. That's not always the best answer for the long term.
So, you know, you get on Hot Rod Garage, right? This big moment. You're still racing, right? You've still got that.
Full time.
And then what else starts to add on? Like, now we're moving into, when did you start filming Hot Rod Garage? That was in 2022?
2022, April of 2022. So we've got 2 seasons under our belt. We're going into our 3rd season now. We start in February. It's very exciting. And so we have another full season, which is 13 episodes. This year, I've got a full race schedule with our 55 Chevy lined up. And then I've got another potential racing opportunity, which may put me in another very fast car for 2 to 3 races this year. So, like, it's just stuff like that. My shop, I'm looking at it right now. It's just right across the road. I bought an 8,000 square foot shop last year. We're hoping to have that done by later this year. Stuff is slow. It's hard to get stuff done. It's hard to race and be gone and convey messages. So hoping maybe October, but it's renovating. And I'm just really focusing this year on, last year I realized I was my own worst enemy as far as like schedule goes, and saying I don't have enough time to do stuff.
Oh, interesting.
That's not true. It's not true, you know, like I'd be like, well, I can't do more. But then I'd see I had 8 hours of screen time that day. And I'm like, it's not that I didn't have time. I just didn't use my time. It's just like this year, I'm trying to be more proactive in my scheduling, trying to be more conscientious of like my commitments, because sometimes I overcommit myself, and just trying to be more proactive with that. And it's one of those things, like, when you have a busy schedule, you don't want to like wear yourself out. And I'm totally fine going full throttle as long as it's stuff that I love. So I keep saying, I'm like, I don't want to do less. I just want to do the stuff that I love doing. And I'm trying to work on getting back to growing ATR a little bit more, and still doing what I need to do for Hot Rod Garage and stuff like that. So balancing everything and doing stuff that I like doing, that I love doing.
Last year, you had kind of a racing opportunity that was something brand new with the Rebelle Rally. So talk about how that came along, and what was that like? Because very different than what you've been doing, you know, previously, right? Being kind of that off-roading is quite different from the drag strips. So
very different. So in what month was it? It would have been probably like June. Pennzoil called me. There's a guy that works there. He's great. And he's been just amazing. He calls me and he's like, Alex, I have an opportunity. Do you want to drive off-road? And I'm like, yeah, duh. Of course. And I'm thinking like Baja, like fast-paced, like something like that for a day. He's like, he's like, I don't know all the details yet, but it's a 10-day rally. And you have to have your sister, or you have to have a female partner, and like all this. And he's like, you can look it up on the website. So long story short, it ends up being the Rebelle Rally. It's 8 days of competition, but it's a 10-day rally. And I had to have female, it's all female. And it's the longest off-road rally in the U.S. We ended up racing 2,100 kilometers. I don't know what that is in miles. I'm not used to kilometers, but we didn't race. I'm sorry. We don't race on the Rebelle. It's about precision navigation. And so we had to navigate with map and compass. We couldn't have our phone or any technology for 8 days. It was the craziest thing ever. So we camped for 8 days. We rallied for 8 days. We went through some of the craziest terrain in a Jeep. It was totally different than drag racing.
Yeah. What was the takeaway from that? Like, would you do it again? Or you're like, that's cool. That's a good experience. Did it once. I'm good.
it was funny because like when I got done with it, I'm like, I found myself every day being like, this is a race. And I'm like, no, it's not a race. That's the specific thing they tell us, is that it's not a race. But I'm like, it is. And so I had a lot of opportunities this past year to drive different things. I had the opportunity to drive off-road. I got to land speed race. I got my 200 mile an hour license land speed racing this past year. Like I did all kinds of very cool stuff. And I loved all of them. But at the end of the day, I was like, drag racing. I love acceleration. I love drag racing. And the Rebel is one that I walked away from and I was like, I'm not doing that again. It's not for me. But I found myself a couple weeks later after some of the initial hit of it wore off. And I'm like, that was actually really cool.
That's
so
like
it's not,
just so you know.
that makes sense.
Is very similar. After trying to do that again, and then you're like, well, it wasn't that bad.
I could see that because I was like, I'm not doing that again. That was painful, and like not strenuous. It was just like, but then I found, and not that it wasn't a good time. I loved it. I loved every second of it with the people. But it's just like, this isn't for me. But I would do it again. I probably wouldn't do it every year because like I'm a very competitive person, and to be competitive, you have to dedicate your time to train for that.
Right.
And I couldn't do that and do what I do. And that's one of the biggest things that would hinder me from doing it. Cause like, I don't want to go back necessarily just to do it. I would like to hone my skills. So that's something that like, I would do it again if I had the time to like invest the time that I need to grow my skills there.
For sure. Makes a ton of sense. So, 2024, you're saying is all about being proactive and really kind of focusing on, you've got a lot of opportunities. You've got the shop coming online. You've got a full race schedule. You've got some opportunities, race some fast vehicles. What does the broader horizon look like for you? I know you had a little movie spot last year. Is that something you want to explore more? Or are you more like, I'm staying with the, I want to keep going this way? What is kind of the broader vision?
That's the thing. And that's one of those where it sounds like I very much understand now that, like, say, for example, in my shop, I understand that if I say, I want it to be done by October, that's not going to get it done by October. I have to plan that budget out. I have to plan those projects out, or else I know it's not going to happen. So when I say that I don't know what I want my end goal to be, it's not that I don't have ideas. It's just that I love waking up not knowing what tomorrow holds. Like that's one of the things I love. So I don't know what I want the end goal to be like. I do know, however, that I really want to start working on parts and like creating parts for a business that my dad and I want to do together. We have lots of product ideas. And so like, that's something that we've talked about in depth this year. I've set aside time this year, like marked it on my schedule where I will be at the shop where dad and I can also, I like working with my dad. Like we do good together. Set aside time where like, we're going to start our own little like more TV-esque series that's going to live on YouTube with like 6 episodes this year. And so it's like, I just want to expand further in the areas that I'm doing. So like driving opportunity that I talked about, it's like, okay, I want to continue adding skills to my, and things to my resume driving. So like the other car that I'm talking about stepping into will allow me to do that. And so it's one of those that like, I just want to continue to progress. And I think as I do that, keeping in mind that I want to stay hands-on, I want to stay mechanical, I want to stay in the driver's seat, but I also love business. I love the business side of stuff. And it's just finding a way. I'm constantly thinking. I constantly have notes in my phone of things I should merchandise, products we should create, things like this. And it's just finding a way to expand everything that I'm doing to a larger scale, if that makes sense. Like I love what I'm doing. I love all the aspects of it. I just want to grow it.
Yeah, so. That's awesome. That's so great. Alex, last thing, any advice you have to, let's say, people that are just getting started in the industry? They're that teenage version, right, of you. What advice would you give that person? You're not too far from your teenage years. Could 16-year-old Alex have pictured where you'd be just 8 short years later, or what? 10 years? Wait, you're 10 years older. Yeah. So could you picture where you would be, seen this future for yourself? So what advice would you give little Alex?
I enjoyed the process. I guess that's the whole thing. Enjoy the process. And that's something I have to remind myself of now is I didn't start what I was doing then with the intention of doing what I'm doing now. And I'm not saying it's bad to start like that, but I didn't say that I want to have 300,000 followers on Instagram and I want 70,000 subscribers, whatever those numbers are. I didn't set these arbitrary. Take the time to try different things. Try whatever opportunities present themselves. Like, take the opportunity to learn as much as you can. Like, I spent a lot of my time learning. And it's one of those things, like, don't get so caught up in the arbitrary stuff that you forget to enjoy that process, because it's really easy. I remember I would sit and I'd go to, like, pretty much when I was in college, I'd go to any time that they had a public speaker come in or somebody that, like, was from the community that was a business person. I'd go listen because I'm like, well, how'd they do it? And I remember, like, them telling their story, and I'm like, how did you know to do these things? They didn't. That's the thing. They didn't. Realistically, they didn't. I didn't know it. I didn't know. I didn't know. I had great people. So find one really key piece of advice. Find your people. Like, build a really strong group around you. Like, I couldn't do it without the people around me. And so find your people, find your passion, and enjoy the process, because that makes all the difference. So that's my advice.
I love it. Wise words. Well, Alex, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing all the cool things you got going in 2024.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.